This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by Sound Porter Mastering, OWC, Atom Audio, API Audio, Jay-Z Microphones, Spectra 1964, and iZotope. In fact, you're hearing my voice right now through the Jay-Z pop filter on the Jay-Z BB29 microphone, through the Spectra 1964 STX600 mic pre-complementer, and iZotope RX and Ozone, all recorded safely onto an OWC Mercury Extreme Pro 6G SSD. So get ready to rock.
I was about to abandon the idea, and our bass player runs into the other room like, "What is that? That's great. What are you doing?" I'm like, "It's just this little thing that I was about to sweep under the rug." It's like, no, that needs to be the thing. You need to play that here. And over time it became something that I really loved. But I think what I learned from that is the experience of playing a part and the experience of listening to a part are two totally different things.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio.
When I master a song, I'm immersed and committed to its sonic fidelity from start to beyond finished. Hi, I'm Brian Murphy of Sound Porter Mastering. My goal in every master is to help you prepare so that you're not compromising your timeline, budget, or your mix. My iterative process helps build a relationship with you so that you don't have to ever second-guess your mix. Let's pull back the curtains on mastering because there's no secrets here. Send me your mix and I'll give you free feedback or a free mastered demo. Just hit me up at soundporter.com.
Whether you're in the studio or working remotely, the Envoy Pro FX from OWC lets you record from anywhere with confidence, pushing USB technology bandwidth to the max of 2,800 megabytes per second over Thunderbolt. Transfer tracks in seconds and take your sessions with you anywhere you go. Built for the road, the OWC Envoy Pro FX is waterproof, dustproof, and crushproof. Find the new Envoy Pro FX and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. Jay-Z Mics brings you the ultimate futuristic pop filter for your studio, built from solid metal parts that won't break and a flexible gooseneck for easy placement. The Jay-Z pop filter uses a unique waveguide design that prevents plosives from getting through to the mic while allowing important high frequencies for clarity. Plus, it looks super cool and you're hearing my voice on it right now. Use the limited time coupon ROCKSTARS to get 20% off this amazing pop filter from jzmic.com. Hey Rockstars, it's your host, Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Kayson Cooley, a writer, musician, and producer who started music at a young age in Wichita, Kansas, often traveling across the country with his parents, who are part of the Grammy Award-winning Southern gospel group, the Cathedral Quartet. In 1997, Cason moved to Nashville to pursue music on his own, becoming a member of the Normals, followed by focusing his attention on songwriting and production in the studio. Casey has written and produced for artists such as Ingrid Michaelson, including her singles Girls Chase Boys and Hell No, American authors, the single Deep Water, Katie Herzig, Ben Rector, David Archuletta, and many more. His work has been placed in dozens of popular television shows, including Grey's Anatomy and Pretty Little Liars. And most recently, he's produced Need to Breathe's latest album, Out of Body, and American Authors' Seasons, Drew Holcomb's Dragons, and Ingrid Michaelson's Stranger Songs. Cason is now based out of Nashville, where he works out of his studio, the Casonic Lodge, or the Casonic Lodge. How do you like to say that?
Casonic Lodge.
All right, dig it. The Casonic Lodge. Thanks also, and a big shout out to Elena Moran at 888 Management for our introduction. Please welcome Kayson Cooley to Recording Studio Rockstars. Kayson, are you ready to rock, my friend?
Yes, I am. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, dude, good to have you here. Maybe we should put this in context. Of course, we're in the middle of snowpocalypse here in Nashville. Yeah. And I think you said that you had to join us from a unique location right now.
Yeah, I'm in the master closet of our house right now, and we have 3 boys that are all in virtual schooling. So trying to keep myself quarantined back here.
Awesome.
during
And then we had to do a little mic shootout for your Skype call, in fact. It turns out that just the ye old speaker iPhone was the best choice, right?
It's the best choice. It's it's becoming a good choice for recording too, I think.
Really? Are you getting to do records with people where their vocals were just done on an iPhone mic?
Not like there's definitely records that I love that, you listen to these types of interviews and you find out that they were doing vocals that way and they just kept them. But I've used it more of people kind of phoning in a part, so to speak. Like, hey, we need a background part here, or, change of a lyric on a background part. And that tends to work fine.
Really? So people just like record it on their phone and just text it over and you just slip it right into the session?
That's happened. There's been times where I've, been home. Maybe I'm just staying home and editing on a record and not recording. And I'm like, this needs a little acoustic part right here or something. And I'll, just listen to the Pro Tools session on headphones, pick up a guitar, hit record on just the voice memo, and I'll play it, then email it to myself and slide it into the session. And it's got a cool sound.
Yeah, that's pretty groovy. I love, it's kind of like, I don't know if this goes too far back for you, but for my generation, it was all about the jam box, and it was about recording your band on the cassette on a jam box, and then you listened back to that later, and you're like, "Oh my God, that sounds so cool!" And it had all the compression and stuff.
Yeah, like pretend it's intentional. The limitations of it.
Yeah, now it's about the iPhone. It's definitely like the Memo app sounds pretty amazing when you listen.
It really does. I think this is something I'm kind of running across a lot now, and maybe it's the type of artist I work with or how I work, but. People aren't just sitting at home recording, just writing their songs and recording it onto a voice memo. They do, but a lot of people just have enough savvy to kind of open up a session and start kind of mocking a sound up for themselves. And then they get stuck and they need help kind of getting out of that. So I'm getting things handed to me sometimes. I have a lot of really cool things that were recorded in bedrooms or just recorded off their phone mic or something. And so trying to find unique and creative ways to incorporate that into the sound of the, more proper recording is just kind of a cool window in sometimes.
Right. So if in the past, as a producer, you might have an artist come to you and they've got nothing more than the song written down on a piece of paper and they can play it on acoustic and everything began with the producer. Now, today, you're saying everybody has access to some sort of GarageBand studio. And so inevitably, almost every songwriter starts with their own version of a creation and then comes to you to sort of take it to the next level.
Yeah. Or, exactly what you said. Like it does happen where people are, writing their song and they record it on a voice memo and it is just acoustic vocal. And I really like that because it kind of, you get you imagine something in your head immediately that might be different than what they thought. And you're like, oh, that's a cool direction. And so you go in a different direction that way. But the opposite's cool too, where the artist has something in their head and they're able to get that out before they get to you. And a lot of times, you're faced with that decision of, okay, do I need to reimagine this and impose my will on it? Or there's times when you're like, I love listening to this demo. Like, how can we find out what's cool about it, use what's already there, or, reverse engineer the vibe that you've got somehow. So, that's just a part of the process that I don't think it's just way more prevalent now. I think if you're working with the artist, maybe they have 50 or 60 different songs that they've written with other songwriters. And a lot of those songwriting sessions people are, they have a track going already, or like, let's write to this beat or this sound that I like. So even the song is kind of being birthed out of a vibe more than just a pure song in a certain way.
Everybody's writing in the studio these days.
Yeah. But that's a new challenge of like, how do I take these different vibes that you've done with all these different people and kind of harmonize them into a singular sound for you?
Well, so you had a unique start with music. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into music and, coming to Nashville to get started.
Yeah, well, I was kind of just born into music. I mean, my parents were musicians. They traveled and sang. My dad was a piano player for a Southern Gospel Quartet that was based out of Ohio at the time, called the Cathedral Quartet. And he was with them for 5 years, and they were doing well. They were nominated for a few Grammys during that time and won a lot of Dove Awards. And But when I was born, I think my dad just didn't want to be on the road, 5 or 6 days a week, I think is kind of what they were doing. And so he quit, and my mom learned to play bass and learned to sing harmony, and they just started booking their own shows and going to churches and playing Southern gospel music that way. And I started singing on stage with them when I was like 2.5 years old, I think.
Wow.
I think I recorded for the first time when I was 3. And that was my upbringing. I did that up until I was about 16, and, had, just thoughts of wanting to do something else, and thought I wanted to get into architecture and take a different path. But the closer I kind of got to the end of high school, I was like, I really do love doing music. I think I already kind of have a temperament for the ups and downs of the lifestyle, and maybe I should kind of pursue this further. So I started looking at, how to do that, where I was going to move, and that brought me to Nashville eventually.
Do you remember the first time you realized you're like, I just thought all kids were up on stage singing harmony at 3. And it turns out that they're not.
I was always the oddball at school because of that. It was funny because I was always sort of the most musical person in any situation. I just thought I knew everything about music. And I came to Belmont and thought, well, I want to study like the business side of it, and I don't need any more music education. And I thought I'll just take a theory class and just to, keep my brush up on my chops and keep sharp on all that. And I took a theory class to realize I didn't know any theory. They were asking to write out the Dorian scale and all these different scales. I'm like, I never heard of any of this before. So
all you knew was the People's Key.
Yeah, exactly.
Which one is that? Is that G or C?
Probably C, because there's no black notes. Yeah.
Interesting. So, all right. So you're growing up playing music, Belmont, music theory. What about sort of, once you decided that you wanted to do that, and by the way, interesting aside, I was doing some music, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. I did go to architecture school, did the whole 4 years until I finally realized, oh, wait, I think I want to be doing music, and switched. So it's probably good that you didn't have to do that, go down that extra road.
One year at Belmont is all I really had.
Oh, okay. All right. Dig it. Yeah. Well, so you got out of there and you decided you wanted to do this seriously. What was some of the first experiences for you in terms of trying to pursue music seriously? Did you just go get a job in a coffee shop, or did you really go for it
No, I came to Belmont. Actually, it's odd how instrumental this is to this progression of the story, but I was really into basketball in high school. And that took up all my time, and I ended up blowing out my knee and had to have knee surgery a couple times, actually. And it just kind of put me in bed for weeks at a time, immobilizing my knee. And that's sort of when I really started to listen to records. And it, at that point, coming up in the Southern Gospel circle, the records were pretty much, you just played, everything was a live take. And I was listening to some records, and it just kind of dawned on me that this isn't a live take. Like, someone's making decisions on when these instruments come in and out. Like, there's a real arrangement here. And I was like, wow, that seems really fun. And I just wanted to be one of those. I wanted to be in the room where those decisions were being made, and being one of the people that was just responsible for making music that I'd want to listen to. And so, when I got to the end of high school, I thought, well, how can I get in those rooms? And what made the most sense at the time was to go to a school and learn recording. I think I knew what a producer was, and I knew I wanted to do that, but I didn't think you could just take a class for that. So I was like, if I can learn engineering and I can kind of get into that world, then I can, meet people and kind of, glean some knowledge from how producers are treating artists, and just learn the psychological side of it like that.
So
that was
what time was this,
strategy.
or what year was this that you're sort of going through this?
This is 97. So I moved in 97 to Belmont, or to Nashville, and was taking classes at Belmont.
Okay, dig it. And so, 97 is also a time of, I suppose all times are times of transition for music, but the transition in 97 would have been, the birth of computer recording and Pro Tools, and like you said, kind of a change from live performances in the studio to premeditated, programmed and arranged performances in the computer.
Yep. I think that was a big key Because even those first couple of years at Belmont, it was a big deal to get into the studio. Like studios were still, it was a big deal to get into one. They were limited. Everyone was trying to get in. And so just coming up into that system, I think there was a lot of, you just had, you had to know what you were doing. And I think there's part of me that liked figuring out what I was doing on my own time and then maybe showing that to people later. So with Pro Tools becoming more ubiquitous, that definitely, I think helped me, like learning how to make rooms out of bedrooms with friends and like in a less pressured situation. I think is kind of how I learned and how I liked to learn.
And that was, that was a fun thing to do back then too, because with, before 97, leading up to that would have been the ADAT studio, and then post 97 would have been like, the early Pro Tools studio, but it was the ability to have a computer and record in a home studio situation. That was a lot of fun. Plus there was, if you were in Nashville, which you were, one of the things that we discovered was, wait, there's these rental companies. You can just go rent a really nice mic preamp and a microphone and stuff if you need to.
Yeah. I think that was a big, when I started kind of producing my own records too, what was becoming popular is just building a studio in your backyard. And then when you kind of approached an artist, you didn't have this pressure of like, oh, there's this really strict day rate that's going to just drain your whole budget in a few days. Like you could really stretch out over a few weeks and figure out what you were trying to do and be creative. And so I'm really glad I came up in that time. I feel like the period before that, just the studio was a very high pressure situation, which I think, a lot of great things came from that. But I don't know if I would have had the temperament to really push through if I would have come along, 10, 20 years earlier.
So moving forward, you've built your own studio, the Casonic Lodge, which I guess is a nod to the Masonic Lodge, which we do have one of those big giant buildings downtown right next to the high school.
I always thought it would be cool to buy an old Masonic Lodge and turn it into a studio. But it's kind of a play off my name too. And so I kind of put that together. I thought it was clever. And then a buddy of mine was like, the word Sonic is in there too, which is like cool as well.
Oh, yeah, good point. And of course, the Masonic Lodge is, the real reason to do them as a studio is great sound isolation. Look at those big, giant, thick stone walls, right?
Yeah, good to cut drums or something.
Well, anyway, so we don't need to. I know you would, if you told us what degree of Casonic Lodge member you were, you'd have to then kill us. So we can't ask you that on the podcast. But tell us about your studio.
Well, my studio, it kind of evolved out of my house. Right when I first started producing records, I was, that was around the time I got married. And before that, I had a house in East Nashville and had a couple roommates, and we just had a room in the house kind of set aside for recording. And, it just eventually kind of sprawled out of that room into the dining room and into the living room. Then after I got married, I was like, if we're having friends over for dinner, I just don't want to have to set up these mics every day and then take them down and have blankets tacked up in the hallway for a vocal booth. It's like, let's just go figure out how to get alone and build something in the backyard. And I had friends that had done that, and it worked well, and it was affordable. And so I built just a 600 square foot cinder block building in the backyard, just one big room with one ISO booth in it. And I had a lot of people say, oh, you need to have a room within a room for the ISO and, walls that aren't at 90-degree angles. And at that time, I was like, I can't tell the difference. And that's so much money. I just need to build something and just, solve problems as I go along. And if I can't hear the difference in the recording, then I can't afford to change it right now. So
interesting. Yeah. I mean, I probably knew just enough to be dangerous when I was deciding to do my studio. But it's very freeing to just sort of let go of that stuff and just go, you know what, I'm just going to focus on the fun part. Where does my guitar amp go?
Yeah. Coming out of Belmont, I'd met Andy Osenga, who was a songwriter there at the time. And he got signed to Forefront Records and was able to kind of basically put his high school band back together. And they got signed to Forefront Records, a band called The Normals. And I started touring with them as a road manager, running live sound at first. and eventually ended up playing keyboards in the band. The second record that they made that I actually played on is a record called Coming to Life, and it was produced by Malcolm Byrne, who, we were just big Daniel Lanois heads. We loved everything he did. And we wanted to be in that world and close to those people. And Malcolm had recorded and engineered Wrecking Ball, the Emmylou Harris record that was just, seminal for us.
Yeah, I was there. That was my internship, was at Woodland.
Oh, really?
Yeah, wow, I wasn't in the studio on that, but I got to meet Daniel, and I got to meet, I probably met Malcolm too, and I met some of the musicians that came through and his assistant as they were loading up the studio and stuff. So that's cool.
Yeah. I mean, that record is still just a real touchstone for so many people, I feel like, in this town especially. But we did a record with him, and he had a house in New Orleans. It was kind of like Kingsway light. Kingsway was Lanois' big studio and a house, and Malcolm had a house there on Clouette Street. And they actually did the Red Dirt Girl, Emmylou Harris's next record, they did there. But he was just set up, he had his console, in the living room, and had people playing live and guitar amps tucked around corners. And it just wasn't a studio, it was a house. And it was really, really comfortable recording that way.
Yeah.
And, he lived on the third floor. He had some bedrooms on the second floor where we could crash. And then we all recorded on the ground floor. And I just thought, this is the best way to make a record, like coming out of the stuffy studio environment and recording at home just was so much fun and less pressure. And I just really love that way of doing things. So
the Spectra 1964 BBDI passive direct box is perfect for recording deep bass that will make your mixes sound huge. Plug that into a C610 comp limiter, and as founder Bill Cheney points out, it'll move your pant leg. But what if you want to record direct keyboards? Spectra 1964 now offers the stereo BBDI 2 with custom wound high Z transformers for big headroom, virtually flat response, and a 15 dB input pad at spectra1964.com. You may already know that iZotope creates the very best smart plugins for mixing and mastering. But did you know that now you can get them all through iZotope's new affordable subscription bundles? Get Music Production Suite Pro for only $24.99 per month, or Producers Club for only $19.99 per month. Start your 7-day free trial subscription now, or go to iZotope.com/rockstars and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. Coupon not valid for subscriptions or Spire Studio. Do you feel like that homey environment or the homey feeling for a studio is mostly conducive towards, the musicians sitting together and playing guitars and instruments like that? Or do you feel like it's also really helpful for programming music and starting with sounds that come out of synthesizers and computers and that sort of thing? Or do you feel like that's not even a distinction to worry about?
I think that kind of depends on your gear. I mean, I love recording that way, setting up and playing live. And as I've, grown and have my own studio and everything, I've never really invested enough money into being able to record a band live, like people sitting around and playing live. So it's more almost like an overdub studio. So yeah, I think that kind of gets a little bit into how big your home setup is,
Yeah. I mean, if you have to crank up the amps really loud, then it might feel different than if you're playing acoustic guitar.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, cool. So the Casonic Lodge, so you set that up. Describe it a little bit more. Like what are the tools that surround you in your studio setting? And when you talked about one big room plus one overdub room, it reminds me of when I built my studio. And Roger Mutino asked me, he's like, are you doing a writing room? And I was like, what's a writing room? And he was like, that's where it's one big room because you want everything right there because you're the one making the music.
Yeah. I mean, I would say it's like that. Like I try to keep as many keyboards and random stringed instruments sitting around as possible that people can, if they want to throw down an idea, they can.
Right.
And it's set up to kind of get to things quickly. So when you're writing, I was saying, like, I wasn't set up to do a full band, but, I do complete records there. Like I've worked with bands where we never get into a proper studio and just all kind of gets built that way.
Yeah.
So you can be very creative. You can make a full record that way. But, when I built the studio as well, the reason I brought up the Malcolm thing is that I learned that you could make any space sound good. If you and that the limitations can become the virtues. And if you need something totally different, you can always leave and go somewhere else. But
what
when
are
I built the studio,
I was going to say, when you say you can make anything sound good, which are you thinking sort of more about the instrument that's getting recorded, or are you thinking about even like the speakers and mixing?
I'm thinking about the speakers and mixing. I've just seen enough, really prominent people in the industry that have built their studio into some random room somewhere. And they're making great sounding records that I love. And I don't have to have the proper, Music Row studio to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's always been kind of encouraging to me. I think that's one of the things I learned from working with Malcolm.
Yeah.
But I was going to say, even having an ISO booth at the beginning, I thought, well, you have to have an ISO booth. And I've even been thinking about taking that out of my studio, kind of rearranging it a little bit because no one uses it. Like, it's pretty common now for people just to record their vocals right there in the room standing next to you. I think with the writing process and the recording process kind of bleeding into each other a lot more, people just feel comfortable standing close to you where you can see them and communicate quickly, and you can get a good sound that way. And it's like, I don't really know what I'm using my ISO booth for anymore.
Right. So a difference there would be if you're recording vocals with somebody and you're in a control room, you're listening to what they're singing on the speakers and giving them feedback. But if you're standing right next to them, you're just both in headphones, and it's super easy to communicate.
That's sort of the limitation. I think if you're really, I don't know, you can try different mics and record them listening back and make a decision. It takes a little bit longer. But once you kind of get going, you're in headphones. There's, it's not a huge room, so there's enough sound isolation. And but what you benefit from the singer feeling relaxed and being able to kind of communicate quickly, and they can see your body language as you're recording, and it just feels more alive. It feels a little more natural to me.
What are some of the limitations to being the producer engineer where you have to have headphones on? Are there certain things where you've learned to watch out? Like, I don't know, I'm just making stuff up here, like, oh, I didn't compress it enough, or the S's were a problem, or any of those kind of little details?
Nothing that can't be easily fixed with software now. Mainly just sound in the room. If there's another person in the room, like sometimes you write a song and there's a third writer there, and you write the song with someone and they come back a few months later and like, hey, I want to put that out, but they don't want to come back and re-sing anything, or maybe they live out of town. So you get a few takes during the writing session, and you have to make that work. So I would say the biggest limitation is just room noise, like someone moved around, or there's like a pop, someone's phone dings or something like that. But I mean, all that Isotope RX software is so useful now.
It's funny, you're bringing up the phone thing. I don't know if the phone's changed, but there seems to have been this chapter where if you had an AT&T phone, it would make this chirping noise on all the microphone lines in the studio.
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. I actually haven't heard that in a minute. Yeah, I mean, that's the first time I've thought about it in a while, but there was definitely hey, can you turn your phone off right now?
Yeah, thank God for technology there. All right, well, let's keep jumping forward. So we have more mutual interests. We both worked with an artist named KS Rhodes. Great, super talented dude. KS, shout out to you, my brother. Tell us about working with him.
Working with KS happened kind of in a season where I just wanted to kind of go for broke on all the records that I was making, regardless of, low budgets, and just trying to figure out what I could do, how far I could take a record. And with KS, you can take a record pretty far because he brings so much to the table, just with instincts, but songwriting is off the charts, but just his ability to arrange instruments too.
Yeah, he could play just about anything. I'm pretty sure. I don't remember if I got him to play drums ever, but pick up anything else.
I think that was the only thing on that record that, besides strings, that we didn't play ourselves. But it was funny. We were making his record, and there's a lot of string arrangement stuff. We had string players into the studio to play all those parts, and And then right in the middle of making the record, he got invited to arrange his songs and play with the Nashville Symphony for a Live on the Green thing.
Oh, I remember that show. That was a great one.
Yeah. So he, here he ends up arranging horns and everything else at, parts that weren't already on the record. He arranges it for this orchestra, and all of a sudden we've got all these new, really cool parts that we had to try to figure out how to get into the record, So, and of course we didn't have access to every live horn instrument you could think of, or it might have taken too much time to record all of that. So we had, it was a good blend of, real orchestration and fake orchestration and kind of putting it all together. It ended up being a very colorful record.
Yeah. Well, he was really talented. I mean, is really talented. And one of the things immediately that came to light was his ability to write down the music and arrange for strings. So we were recording strings in the studio right away, and this is fun. He really loved that. And then he also raps. He can freestyle. He's one of the few artists who could just freestyle on a mic that I've worked with.
Well, that was like on that record. There's one piece that's just a classical piece, just an instrumental piece, and then there's two songs where he's rapping. So, and even when you make a record like that, the influences are so all over the map. Just trying to kind of blend that all together and turn it into a record. I kind of told him as producer, I think my main goal with you is just to figure out how to shut down the right 80% of your brain. Like there's so much going on, just to kind of like keep the best parts and kind of simplify it. And still, even with that, it's like I said, a very colorful record. But
yeah. So the record you guys did, or the first record, was The Wilderness, right?
That's right.
Okay. And Rockstars, I put together a playlist of Cayson's music, in the show notes. So just click through and you can go listen to a bunch of the records and check that one out too. But it's got a great picture of Kevin wearing a spacesuit. It's like wearing an astronaut suit, just standing in a field. Love it. Cool. And then let's see, another artist that you worked with that is quite remarkable. And I know the song well because I have a teenage daughter who turns me on to great pop music like this. But Ingrid Michaelson, Girls Chase Boys. Tell us a story about making that with her.
Yeah, that was the way I met her was through working with Katie Herzig, which is an artist I've made 3 records with. And she's, gets a lot of placements and is signed with a placement company called Secret Road. And Secret Road is owned by Lynn Grossman, who also manages Ingrid. So I think Ingrid was, like Katie's music, was interested in working with her. And so she wanted to come and write with her and do some recording with her. And then Katie kind of brought me in on that as well. Like, can you just kind of go through this process with us? So that's kind of how I met Ingrid, with the intent of doing 4 or 5 songs, which we did. We recorded our songs and we were kind of done. That was a great experience. And then that all happened in the middle of making one of Katie's records. So I think we were both sort of like, all right, ready. Now we're ready to kind of dig back in on Katie's solo record. And they kind of softballed this song over to us over an email, being like, hey, here's a song we wrote. We think it could be really cool. Would you guys just want to take a day, see what you could do with it? And we were like, yeah, let's just take a day, throw something together for them and see if it sticks, see if it's a thing. And I think doing it fast like that really helped it pop, because that track is mainly, I think it's like 118 tracks, and I think 20 or 30 of them are instruments and everything else is just vocals, and most of it's just groove and rhythm. So there's not a ton going on. It's a kind of sleek track that way.
So you didn't spend 12 hours sound checking the kick drum to start the session?
No, again, we did it all with programming. I mean, we programmed it all up, and then they really liked it. They responded well to it. Her band was in town doing some other tracks with another producer. And they're like, hey, we can give you her band for a day if you want them to play on some of the stuff you did. So we had them play on a few songs, and that was one of them. So, they came in and played on that track and, just a couple hours. And then
And so that was Katie and Ingrid started the song together? Or did I misunderstand that?
No. That song was written with Ingrid wrote that with Trent Dabbs and Barry Dean.
Oh, okay.
So she was in town writing with some other people, and they were like, "Hey, this is just another song that we wrote, and we think you guys could do something cool with it? Could you take a stab at it? So
right on. And then when you guys decided to go into the studio with the band, what's some of the stuff you remember about that? Like what sorts of instruments got replaced with new sounds that were from a band? What kind of things would have been added to it?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing was the drums. I think, in something that goes top 40, it's kind of a programmed sound, but on that song, it's a lot of the live drums kind of carried through. At the time, at the studio, in that, we did it in a couple hours, like I was saying, just pretty much bass and drums. And then Chris Kuffner's her bass player. We came back to my studio eventually, and they were there for, we might have been working on something else, but I've got this old Epiphone acoustic, and there was in the original demo, that little piano part, the ba-da-da, ba-da-da, was like just a little piano part. And we're like, oh, why don't you play that on acoustic guitar? We thought it would be cool to have something acoustic and something poppy like that. So he tuned it up as a really out of tune guitar, and he figured out how to kind of play that riff on the acoustic, and that kind of became the hook of the song.
Nice. If you're ready to upgrade your studio to the famous sound of API's large format consoles, then you're ready for The Box, a small format console featuring the same analog circuitry and original 2520 op amp design that has made API famous for 50 years. Record through 8 world-class mic pre-channels, mix through 24 smooth-as-glass faders, and upgrade your home studio to legendary status. API now offers a virtual console experience, allowing you to get a personalized online demo of The Box at apiaudio.com. Atom Audio can provide all your monitor needs, whether you are setting up a first-time home studio for recording music or podcasts, or a world-class studio for professional mixing and mastering. Their unique accelerated ribbon tweeter design is famous for creating smooth, detailed imaging that let your speakers disappear into your music, allowing you to focus on the mix. Learn how to set up your studio monitors and control room for great sound, plus lots of other cool studio tips at atom-audio.com/education. It's always fun to hear about the discovery of a hook on a song, because when you hear the final version, you think, oh, that must have been the first move. But, sometimes you don't really have the sound of the hook until much later.
Yeah, we did a lot of, like I said, that was sort of in the demo, just the piano part. We recreated on acoustic, but kind of recreated it on Mellotron sounds and different sounds. So it kind of comes in and out at different times in the track in different ways. So it kind of evolves, goes away and comes back. But, the hook starts the song off, and I think that's what makes it kind of easily and quickly identifiable.
Yeah. So tell us some more stories about working with Ingrid. You guys have done a number of records at this point, right?
Yeah, we did. Her last couple records, maybe last 3, She'll Always Come and Write with Katie and I. And Katie and I co-produced it together.
Okay.
And it ends up being maybe like somewhere between 4 and 6 songs on all those records, kind of, of what we do together ends up on the records. But she lived here for a while. She moved back to New York now. But it was pretty casual. Like, she'd come over and we would write, and eventually they decide these songs want to go on the record, and then we just dig in and work on them. But it almost completely happens at my studio.
Yeah, and Katie is super talented too. I mean, I first heard her music in the mid-2000s, I guess. I think this, as we were reminiscing, I think the song was called Satellite, and that was earlier. But yeah, she's super talented. Yeah.
Working with her is a pretty big part of my story as well.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Well, I was, starting to produce and trying to figure out if it would be, how full-time it would be. I was playing live on the road. I was playing with Matt Carney at the time, playing bass with him. And, we were on the road, and he's like, oh, you should check out this artist, Katie Herzig. And like, I heard the music, and it was so colorful and so fun. And it felt like what a next step for me, like the type of music I wanted to be making. It's like, what feels like would be a good next step for her seems like it would be a good next step for me too. And So I saw her at a show and was like, I'd really love to work with you sometime. And she's like, yeah, I've been really thinking about wanting to work with a producer and we should get together and try some stuff. And, that ended up, being to this day, just a very long lasting musical relationship. And so we have really good rhythm. We work together very well. And so, plugging Ingrid into that made a lot of sense too. Like, it's just always a very comfortable environment when we're working together.
Talk a little bit about the writing process in terms of co-writing with people too. Have you found that there are some routines that work well for you with that? I mean, like, maybe, I know that's a very general question, but what does it mean to co-write with somebody for the first time? What are some things that you will inevitably find yourself doing to just get settled in and sort of find out where this session's going to go?
Really, the biggest part is that first couple hours. Sometimes it's a couple hours, sometimes it's just an hour, but where you're just catching up. Like, even if you're meeting someone for the first time, like, you kind of get into why they're here, where they're at in their life right now, and what's going on in the world right now. And you end up getting into a pretty big conversation about all of those things. And that, I think, it kind of makes you feel comfortable with each other. And also kind of over the course of that conversation, you'd be like, hey, we touched on this theme a few times. Like, maybe there's something there that we want to write about right now. And so I think just that first couple hours of settling in, getting to know each other is pretty key.
Yeah. Sorry, by the way, I figured out I was misquoting the title of the song. It's not Satellite, it's Hologram. That's the one I was trying to remember from Katie.
Oh, Hologram. Yeah.
Cool. So just getting settled in, getting to know somebody. And then, okay, so you get to that point, and then it's like somebody says, well, I've got this thing I started the other day, some kind of idea, and you just go for it?
Yeah, I always like to have a handful of things that I've started, like tracks that I've made, like a groove, maybe a sound that's interesting. And you can plug in that way for sure. That can kind of get the ball rolling. But sometimes, there'll be a writer that has like a really great title and you kind of write into that title. It's really different every time. There's definitely been times where, you want to start with the track and you end up writing a song that ends up being just on acoustic. I always feel like I want to give someone at the end of a writing day a pretty put together track that they could take with them that's would make people want to listen to it again. But those days are always nice too, where you're like, I don't think this song needs a big track. This is just a song. And it gets very, very lyric driven, and you kind of just, you hammer in on that.
Right, as opposed to the production and, how cool the drums are or whatever.
Yeah, and I think that's the key in those situations, is just trying to figure out what is naturally trying to happen in the room that day and following that energy. I always call it like being obedient to the moment. Figure out what the moment is trying to do and just obeying that and not impose your will on it too much.
Okay, cool. And then do you find sometimes co-writing is just, getting together and following an idea and it just turns out to be a bad idea? Do we have to be as forgiving of ourselves in a co-writing situation as we do, writing our own first ideas?
I think you have to be very forgiving. It is not uncommon that you get to the end of a writing day. So much of how you judge the writing day has to do with just everyone's mood. Like if everyone just got along great and you're laughing and you did something you thought was really fun, it can feel like, hey, that was a great day. But there's been many times where, you get stuck, you spend a couple hours trying to hammer out the second half of a verse. It feels like, man, our creative juices are just not working right now. Or maybe this is the wrong combo of people. And you kind of leave the day being like, man, okay, we got through it and I don't know how great this is. And then, a few weeks later, everyone's heard it and they love it. And it turns out to be a big track on the record or something.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that's cool to hear. Yeah. Like sometimes you just can't even tell that you've got something great in the moment.
You need distance to judge it. A lot of people think, will say the opposite, that they know immediately if something's great. And sometimes I just need a few weeks to tell. Like I have to be disconnected from the emotion of that day because no one else was there. No one else know if you had a good time or if it was a struggle. They just know if the track's good or not, if the song's good.
Do you have a morning routine that helps you stay creative and sort of put yourself in the right mindset? Is there Is that even the right question to ask for you as a writer?
Not this year.
Not this year. You just go into the closet.
Yeah, no, when I'm in a good routine, it looks something like, we get up about 6:30 and get the kids off to school. And, usually someone will come over to the studio about 10 or 11. So usually you have a couple hours there. And a good routine for me, I love going to Radnor Lake and taking a hike there.
Yeah.
That kind of clears my head. I think it's better if I don't listen to podcasts, but I can't stop listening to podcasts.
It's all right. We'll forgive you.
But I don't know, that kind of clears your head, gets your mind thinking about other things, and then approaching the studio after that, I feel like is very helpful.
Yeah, so if I interpret that, it's a little bit like have a take care of yourself moment to start the day before you go into the creative space. Yeah,
something that has just always stuck with me. I read an interview with George Massenburg, and he was talking to a room of young engineers, and someone had asked him the question, like, what advice do you give to young engineers out there? He was like, live a big life, take your wife out on dates, go on vacations, like experience a lot of things in life, and then bring that back into the studio. And nice. I don't know, that always just stuck with me. So I think doing something in the morning that's not music related is helpful. But then if it's a writing day, I'll come into the studio and just listen to music that I like for a little bit. And that kind of gets me into a good headspace. And then I'll try to, throw a few vibes together before a writer comes in, and then just kind of throw some ideas at them and then just sort of see where the day takes you. But yeah, just having waking up and kind of jumping straight into the studio is less enjoyable for me. It's just good to have some things.
It's sort of like your studio can make you feel like being creative, but it could also make you feel like shutting down, if it feels too, like if it just, if I go into my kitchen and it's clean, I might want to cook something. If it's dirty dishes, I just want to get out of there fast,
Totally. So,
and I think back to, there was a TV show with Ray Bradbury. I forgot what it was called, but he wrote the Martian Chronicles, I think, and like all these sci-fi books. But in the beginning of the show, it starts out and he's in his office space, and it's like all these toys and spaceships and dinosaurs on the shelves. And he describes it as this place he goes to, and he can let his imagination run wild. So, what you're talking about is it's a little bit that reminder of you've got to let your imagination breathe, or else what are you going to write about?
Totally. I think it's so helpful too, just to kind of get out of the studio, break your loop. Everyone's on a loop. You're talking about getting into a routine. You get into this loop, and it's just so helpful to break it. And what you start thinking is important about music can change when you just talk to people that love music that aren't musicians at all. You see what people are reacting to and how people respond to music. And I think I can get really bogged down into, I need to be impressive for this person today. I have to come up with a good part. I need to play well. I need to be creative. And all that stuff is true. But what I think is really connecting with people is something that's unique about the artist. Like what most breaks my loop in the course of a writing day or even recording a record is the artist. Like they're the most unique factor that I have. They're the new information for me today. They're what's going to get me out of my loop. And what is unique about them is ultimately going to be what's compelling about what we do today. So I think it's about mining something great out of who you're working with, as opposed to figuring out how I can impress this person, which is just coming from a bad ego place anyway.
Right. Now, what about writing solo? Do you also write solo? And do you have a way that works for you that way?
I really don't. I'll sit down at the piano and just come up with little motifs. That's really fun for me, but I don't really sit around and write lyrics. I might have song ideas, but when I'm writing with someone, I feel like like I said, I'm trying to bring something out of them, get their creative juices going, and then it's almost like I'm producing them write the song, right? Writing the song a little bit. That it's probably, I'm probably like underselling myself a little bit, but that's what it feels like to me. Is like getting them going and then kind of guiding them through the process a little bit, which I think ends up being more meaningful to them in the end anyway.
iZotope is a secret weapon for your studio that can help you get consistently pro-sounding mixes. And now you can get access to all their plugins through the new subscription options. Only $24.99 per month, Music Production Suite Pro is designed for the serious recording, mixing, and mastering engineer, putting the finishing touches on music, film, and podcasts with fully pro versions of Ozone, RX, Neutron, Nectar, Neoverb, tonal balance control, visual mixer, and much more, including free plugin updates. Or for only $19.99 per month, you can join Producers Club to get a suite of industry-leading production, mixing, and mastering plugins, custom presets, royalty-free samples, production courses, and more. Start your 7-day free trial subscription now or go to iZotope.com/rockstars and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. Coupon not valid for subscriptions or Spire Studio. The Spectra 1964 Custom Shop now offers the STX100D, the big brother to the now famous STX100. A fully discrete mic pre with dual transformer isolated Spectra 101 amplifiers, the STX100D is exactly the same original circuit found in Stax, Ardent, Advision, A&M, and Record Plant recording consoles. The sonic performance is identical. Best of all, it will plug into a single space of your standard 500 lunchbox. And if you want to add the sound of the famous Spectra C610 comp limiter, then check out the new STX600 modules, combining the STX100 mic pre and C610 in a single 500 module. That's how you're hearing my voice. Now you can get that same incredible sound in your studio that worked for famous producers like Tom Dowd with the STX mic pre's, BBDI, and comp limiters. Go to Spectra1964.com or call 801-797-0642. Whether you're in the studio or working remotely, the Envoy Pro FX from OWC lets you record from anywhere with confidence. It pushes USB technology bandwidth to the max of 2,800 megabytes per second over Thunderbolt, giving you high-speed audio data and recording and playback. Transfer tracks in seconds and take your sessions with you anywhere you go. Built for the road, the OWC Envoy Pro FX is waterproof, dustproof, and crushproof. Creativity without limits, only from OWC. Imagine never having to worry about your external drive interface again or compatibility from studio to studio. Find the new Envoy Pro FX and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. Hey, Rockstars, we're back now for the jam session. My guest today is Cason Cooley, joining us from the closet on a snow day here in Nashville. Cason, you ready to jam, man?
Yeah, man, ready to go.
All right. When we were off mic, we started talking about how we got slightly derailed, but there was a story that you started to talk about working with Jim Scott on a record, and I wondered if you wanted to tell us a little bit more about that experience.
Yeah, kind of when you were asking me earlier about how my studio is set up and how you can make any room sound good, my mind went to this experience that I had. I'd played keys with Sixpence None the Richer for a couple of years, and during that time, they made a record with Jim Scott. So we went out to LA, and his setup was it just gives you a lot of freedom to kind of, or like just confidence to kind of set up and make something sound good. He just had a big, like a storage warehouse that he had rented from some friends, and he set up his studio in this corner. And he's like, well, he didn't have a studio at the time. He thought, I'll just mix a record here. And then he just never really moved, and he ended up building some walls around it. And but there was nothing in that studio that felt like this is supposed to be a studio.
What about the tapestries? Didn't he hang a lot of tapestries on the wall?
Well, yeah, he hangs up the tapestries. He has a drop ceiling in there, but there's a wall that kind of goes halfway behind. When you walk into the room, it kind of ends right behind where he's sitting. And, it's just in an industrial park somewhere, but, he's made it sound good. He's tweaked it out, and it's, he's obviously, his mixes are just so impressive to me.
Yeah, yeah.
And like and you see what he's doing. There's always like a simplicity to the mics he's using and the gear he's using. You're like, what's your big secret? And like, I'm sure there's secrets that I don't know that he's doing, but he makes it look very easy.
Yeah.
And he's doing it in a pretty humble spot. And you're like, wow, this is if he can do this, it kind of gives me confidence to try to do the same.
Well, he was very cool. He was on the podcast previously, and Rockstars. You can check that one out if you want. I don't remember the episode number off the top of my head, but he talked about recording Tom Petty and stuff like that. But Jim, a great engineer, and it reminds me a little bit when we were talking about, how a studio can work in any space, and then the vice versa, which is the my experience with Daniel Lanois coming into Woodland Studios to get ready for Wrecking Ball. They came in, they went out of their way to take what was a pro studio and make it feel like a home. So they brought down a truckload of gear and tapestries and incense and just completely transformed the place into New Orleans before the session started.
Yeah.
And I thought that was cool to see. And that was, and they would even go out of their way to say, this isn't working. Just bring the mics into the control room. And they'd just hover around some mics right in this tiny space in the control room.
Yeah. I mean, I love, I've, talked a lot about, working from home and building your own studio and feeling comfortable. At the same time, I love going to a big studio. It's fun and grand, and it's just a completely different experience. You have unlimited amounts of gear. You're working with a good engineer. That's always an important part of the process to me, but usually I'll kind of condense that down to a few days. But if a studio is put together well, it doesn't feel too sterile. It can feel really creative.
As you said, George Massenberg advised you to just live some life experiences, and that's kind of it. It's today we're in a home studio, tomorrow we're in a big, giant, impressive Blackbird Pro studio or wherever.
Yeah.
And those are fun.
Have you had Paul Moak on the show before?
Yes, he was great. He has a super cool studio over in Berry Hill, and just doing a lot of great rock records.
He's an old friend of mine. When I first started making records, I would rent out his studio, which was called the Smokestack, but it was in a little ranch house in Berry Hill. And, we were all young, and, during those times was Paul, my buddy Will Sales, who plays drums. Ian Fitchuk was really involved in the studio of the day, and Justin Laux. And that was sort of our little set back in the days. We'd record over at the Smokestack. And eventually Paul had the chance to buy Platinum Lab Studio, which I'd recorded in a couple times. And it's vibey, but it feels like a commercial studio. Everything's zeroed out at the end of the day. And when he bought it, I was a little bit oh man, it's not going to be as vibey as the little house that we all recorded in, And then he vibed it out. And when you go work over there, you don't feel like you're in a big commercial studio. You feel like you're in Paul Moak's world. He's kind of put his vibe all over the place, and feels very comfortable recording there. So you can definitely, take a sterile studio if the bones of it are that, and vibe it out and have a really wonderful place to record.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is for me with my studio is I'm almost going the other direction now. Just speaking of, trying to experience all the different things. Mine has always been very home studio and funky colors and, stuff everywhere. And now for the first time, we've repainted it all into just one. Believe it or not, my studio is the primary paint color is called analytical gray right now. And I'm working with Carl Tatz to put in his Phantom Focus system. And so I'm sort of experiencing a different, more of taking it, we're also treating it with 703, and we're tightening up the sound everywhere. And it's just, for me, it's just really fun to experience all the different they're all just different colors. It's you've got the colorful home studio and what you can record in there. And then you've got the what feels like a NASA designed spaceship studio and what kind of sound you can create there. And it's just fun to try it all.
Yeah, I think my personality type is I want to experience everything and do everything. And so it's hard for me to kind of commit to one vibe of that.
Right.
We talked about my studio a bit. I've actually just moved back in there. I spent 3 years actually working out of Katie Herzig's house. Because I'd wanted to kind of step up what I was doing and move into a studio that was just a little bit more built, was better built and was sonically designed properly. And she had bought a house, and we turned the basement. It was a beautiful house on top of the hill. It overlooks, this little valley and a lot of natural sunlight. And we had Gary Hedden come in, and he built the studio out, did all the sound design work in it, and it sounded like $1 million. And I worked there for 3 years, and then like her and Butterfly had little studios upstairs, and eventually they're like, we want to take over the studio, move back down here. It just sounds better. And so I was like, well, it's going to be the next move for me. And I never really found a situation that worked right. So I ended up moving back into my old studio. And I was like, well, now's my time to kind of, build in the more proper baffles and set this up right. And I had Gary come over and listen to music. And I was like, what should I do? Tell me what I should hang up and how I should treat this. And he was like, just set up where you're comfortable making music, where it sounds good to you. And once you got that figured out, call me back over and we'll kind of build something around that for you.
Right.
But he's like, but it sounds good now. He's like, it doesn't sound bad now. Like it's not going to take a lot to kind of really dial this in.
Nice. Well, we talk about that a fair amount on the show too, so we don't have to go too deep into that. But learning about bass traps and panels on the walls and all that kind of stuff for the first time is pretty exciting when you start doing it. And it's also very exciting when you discover just how good a pair of speakers can sound in your studio.
Yeah,
when you find it.
Yeah.
You were talking a moment ago about working with Katie. You were talking about lyric and writing lyrics and stuff like that. And so I figured I'd pivot back into songwriting, if that's all right.
Yeah.
How
great.
important are lyrics, and how important are rhyming in lyrics?
Rhyming?
Yeah. We're going to the basics here.
No, that's a good question. It's interesting. I can think of a handful of artists that I really like that don't rhyme.
Mm-hmm.
Or but they're a great songwriter and they're almost like setting up a rhyme and then they go for a different word and that doesn't quite rhyme or feels a little odd. But if they sing it with the right confidence and it kind of feels like they know what they're doing and they're just playing with you a little bit. They're playing with the form. And that's interesting to me. When it's like, I know this person knows how to rhyme. I know they know how to write a song and they've chosen not to here for a second. That always feels kind of, I don't know, just kind of baller to me or something. Like they're just doing their own thing.
Is it is it putting you on the spot to remember the chorus lyrics of "Girls Chase Boys"? Do you have those at the top?
No, not too much.
Okay, well, so I don't know. I know it's like that's where the rhyme is in that chorus, isn't it?
All the pretty votes in the world, all the parts in the world still beat. Let's not make it harder than it has to be.
Yeah, there you go.
It's all the same thing. Girls chase boys.
Right. And then the hook after that, the girls chase boys, doesn't rhyme, but it's got there's a hook to the rhythm of it, which is what makes it so cool too.
Yeah. I mean, probably more pure songwriters might not agree with this, but I feel like it's artist to artist, it's song to song. But I think the real goal is to just leave an impression with a listener. Mm-hmm. And I know for myself, if something has a really good shape, if it sounds really good, where I want to listen to it again and again, man, that could be so many things besides the lyric that kind of keeps bringing me back to a song. And eventually, I'll dig in and I'll figure out what the lyric is. What are they saying there? What do they really mean by that?
Yeah, for me, that's like near the end of the song after we just finished mixing it.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm always amazed with myself as far as like just how long it takes me to finally listen to the lyrics of even since I've been producing for a while and be like, oh, that's what that song's about.
Yeah. I mean, I obviously love music. I love listening to music and I love lyrics. Like lyrics are a big deal to me, but it's not the first thing I think my brain pays attention to when I'm listening to someone's record. It's more a vibe, like just the atmosphere and the vibe of something, the spirit of something can really overwhelm me or not click with me at all. And if it overwhelms me, sometimes I'll go back and, the song I've been listening to a lot lately is that Tame Impala song.
Oh, yeah. Which one?
I think it's time to face it. You're not as cool as you used to be. Like That's just great. Those lyrics are so funny to me. It's like he's having this conversation with himself about how he's not very cool and he went to a party and it's not as fun as it used to be. You're not as young as you used to be. You got to face it, Like
it's like a song to himself,
Yeah, but it's like coming from like arguably like the hippest kid on the planet right now.
Yeah,
it's like no one's cooler than this guy, but he's got a song about how he doesn't think he's really that cool. But I didn't catch that the first 10 times I listened to the song. You know, it was just a cool track.
This is a really cool track. This guy's so cool.
Yeah. And then you get into it. You know, another band that really does that for me that I love is Animal Collective. I always feel like they're such cool kids. Like everything they do is like the cutting edge. And you dig into the lyrics, and he's talking about walking his kid to school in the morning, and you know how much, you know, about him and his wife, and just very like common day topic content. But it's just dressed up in this just very avant-garde, very progressive music. That's always an interesting juxtaposition to me.
So as a quick aside, what's funny is you're bringing up Tame Impala. We made it onto that record. So we're,
you did?
Yeah, the podcast, my interview with Jeff Terzo, Kevin sampled that and put it onto the beginning of track 11, Glimmer. So that one, so maybe, hey, Kev, come on back and sample Cason too. Let's build a good thing here.
Oh, this is a funny little aside on Girls Chase Boys. At that time I was really into. I had like a vinyl player, and I was trying to sample things off of other records or whatever. And I mentioned my parents grew up doing music, and there was I had one of their old records, and I sampled my mom into that track a lot.
Nice. And did mom come back and you know, it's like, listen, we're gonna have to talk about the clearance rights on that one.
I know she's really upset about her royalties on that. but if you like, there's like this little, you know, it's like what, you know, they call chipmunk soul or whatever, where something's kind of pitched up and it's a little vocal clip, but it sounds kind of like like this little kind of high vocally thing, and it kind of, I get it caught in a loop and run it through the second verse of that song, but that's my mom on that.
Nice. Okay, so let me jump to that, because there was another one. There's a vocal effect for Katie Herzig lines, and it sounds like you sampled sort of the breathy vocals and played them back off a keyboard. I feel like it enters in like the second verse or something like that, or the hook. Does that, I don't know if you remember that specifically right now, but talk a little bit about some fun ways to turn voices into instruments as part of the production process.
Yeah, I feel like I do that a lot, but I never really have a plan how I'm going to do it.
Yeah,
it kind of gets to that thing about being in it. You know, that's the type of thing I would never do in a big studio, is when you got people on the clock and you're like, hey, let me sit around and monkey around with this for a while.
Right.
But when I'm at home, you know, in my own studio, kind of working, I'll mess around with that stuff for a long time. And but yeah, I mean, pitch shifting, distortion. One plugin I like to use a lot that is Rectify, which is like the Pro Tools. It's just stock; it comes with it, but it just kind of makes a granular thing. And like when you put that on a bass, it just kind of, or on the low end of something, it sounds like, you know, Trent Reznor or Atticus Ross or something really cool, but it's just like this stock plugin that comes with Pro Tools, and I love messing around with that thing a lot.
Yeah, those are fun to just kind of deconstruct sounds. And you know, I've worked with some people who do really great work with that, and you're right. It usually involves sort of disappearing into the computer for a while with some headphones on, and just sort of seeing what you can come up with.
Yeah, and you can spend so much time. You can burn a lot of time experimenting with that stuff, and after a while, you're like, I don't even know what I'm listening to anymore. And you just got to set it aside and come back to it a couple of days later, and you're like, that's really cool. I don't even remember what I did. That was a big takeaway from Jim Scott. I remember when we were making that record, we were really debating over these chord changes or how we're going to get into the bridge, and he was like, you know what? He goes, we could spend 3 hours on this right now and not know what's right or wrong about it. But if we set it aside, let it age on our ears a little bit, we'll come back to it in the morning. We'll know in 10 seconds if it's good or not. And I'm like, man,
even a part that was already tried, or just the idea of adding something new to begin with?
Yeah, in that scenario, I remember we were fussing over a chord progression. Like how in the bridge, like what chords we needed to go to. And everyone had a different idea about it. And he was like, just settle on something right now. Like, you'll never know what's right or wrong right now. But if you just settle on something, we'll come back tomorrow and we'll know in 5 minutes if it's going to be good or not. And so, because you can waste a lot of time experimenting, but sometimes you just got to set it aside and you come back later and either it's really cool or you just instantly are like, well, that sucks. I need to try something.
Just to set the time frame, we just lost Chick Corea recently. And I went back and listened to a bunch of his performances and just thinking about jazz improvisation too. And a reminder of like how much great creative musical elements are created in the middle of a solo, a jazz improvisation. And it's kind of what you're talking about. It's like if every lick and riff was gone back and deliberated over, I mean, we do that in hindsight, but if it was done at the time, would we even have all those great parts? And sometimes we just need to create in the studio, create quickly, and then come back to it later to find out whether we did something cool or not.
Yeah, my best times in the studio is where you get lost. Like you end up working on something, like maybe you've been beating your head against the wall on a track for a couple of days or something. And then all of a sudden you find your way into it and everything feels really inspired and one idea leads to the next and you're manipulating sounds. I think that's the freedom of having, a bunch of plugins available to use. You mean, let me try this. That doesn't work. Let me try this. You're moving really fast. And then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, did I just completely lose track of time? Like, what time is it? And you just burn. Usually that's about 3 hours. I feel like if I can kind of get in a zone and stay in it for about 3 hours, I can really get a lot done.
See? But you're saying the podcast should be 1 hour longer than we usually do it?
Yeah.
Making sure your vocal sounds amazing in your mix starts with capturing your voice perfectly. This means controlling sibilants and plosives at the mic. Back when I started out, we used to make pop filters out of pantyhose and a wire hanger, but not only did it not look good or smell great, but it also didn't sound all that great either. There's a reason that the Beastie Boys said they never rocked the mic with the pantyhose. Fortunately, pop filters have come a long way in the studio, and JZ Mics brings you the ultimate pop filter, built from solid metal parts that won't break and a flexible gooseneck for easy placement. The JZ Pop Filter uses a unique waveguide design that prevents plosives from getting through to the mic while letting important high frequencies through for clarity. Get your vocals just right and use the limited time coupon ROCKSTARS to get 20% off the amazing pop filter at jzmic.com. It would be hard to describe in one sentence what gives records a legendary sound, but it would be easy to describe in 3 letters: API. For more than 50 years, API Audio has created large format consoles for world-class studios. Famous for co-founder Saul Walker's circuit designs and the original 2520 op-amp, the sound of API consoles is the sound of great music. API now brings that legendary sound to your home studio with the Box, a small format console featuring the famous API circuitry that is the perfect analog addition to your digital studio. The Box gives you 8 recording channels on the left with built-in mic pre's, high-pass filters, direct inputs, and customizable 500 module slots, and 16 summing channels on the right. Or you can mix using all 24 channels, including aux sends, inserts, and silky smooth faders. API now offers a virtual console experience with a personalized online demo of the Box, 16082 or 2448 consoles. Sign up for your demo now at apiaudio.com. Okay, cool. Another artist you work with, Need to Breathe. Who Am I think that was one of the tracks. There's these great, like, murky, mysterious synth parts going on in the background. And it sounds like that's right in line with what you're talking about now. Do you remember some of that process? And do you want to share any stories about doing that record?
Yeah, absolutely. That was a record that I co-produced with Jeremy Latito. And so a lot of the cool synth stuff you're talking about probably comes from him. Like, he's, probably most known as a drummer. He's such a great drummer, but he's really a fantastic, just synths and textures kind of guy as well. And we co-produced that record. I had met Bear Reinhardt, the lead singer, that maybe a year earlier through some writing, and ended up going on the road with them for a month. Trent Dabbs was opening the tour, and I was playing keys with him, with the intent that we would sort of write and make demos and think about their next record on the road together. which was really great. Like one thing that I really believe in is seeing how music is connecting with people live, and what their world is like live, like what is important about their music to their fans, and trying to figure out how to, bridge those two things together. So that was an invaluable experience for sure.
Well, you start by bringing back live music, and then, and then we bridge the gap, right?
Yeah, it's like this has got to connect with people in some way, and like how does this band connect with people, and how can I, kind of work from there.
Yeah.
But when we made the record, it was a co-production with Jeremy and I, and obviously they're a fantastic live band. We knew that the core of what we were doing needed to come from live performances.
So where did you guys record that?
Yeah, we ended up recording it at Club Roar, which is Robin Eaton's studio.
Oh,
and we were looking for a place where we could, where the band could play live. We could work on the arrangements. It was like a low fuss kind of situation, and basically do pre-production, which I never really do. And then we decided we were just going to record, like just do the rehearsals there. And, but we wanted a situation where we could record it too, if we wanted to keep anything. And the way his studio is set up in a big warehouse, it reminds me of the kind of a Malcolm Burns situation. Like, yeah, it's just a big room. It's very comfortable. And once we kind of got in there, Jeremy and I were like, we kind of just want to do the whole record here. And so we ended up we did it in two halves, but we would spend 2 weeks working on about 7 songs. And then once we kind of got those tracking sessions done, Jeremy and I would take it back to, at the time, it was his studio. He was renting my studio for a couple of years there. So when we were working on this, he was set up, and I would come over and we would just work on these tracks. He had about half the songs on his laptop and I had half on mine. And then we would work on the songs individually and then kind of swap sessions. And like you work like kind of tag teaming. You work for a while. Because one thing we talked about co-producing is like there's so much to gain from that. But the one thing that can be easily lost is that I'm sitting by yourself with no one over your shoulder and kind of getting lost in something and discovering things. So we're like, let's do this in a way where we give each other that time. Because that's sort of some of the most unique things we can bring to the table. And we didn't want to like chase that out of the room. So we would swap the tracks back and forth and be like, okay, here's my version of this. You go to town on it with a hatchet, cut things out, add some new things and send it back. And so we kind of worked that way.
What do you remember learning about the system for doing that, where did you guys figure out a way to do that where you could just move forward without thinking, but you also could go backwards a little and leave a bit of a breadcrumb trail for yourself if you needed, but not get caught up in that?
The way I work, I think this works really good for some artists, and for others it's too convoluted, but at the end of every day, I'll bounce rough of where things are. And every time in the morning when I open up a Pro Tools session, I just change the date on it. Like it's this date. And then just kind of have a rough folder where like it's sort of a progression of how the song has changed. Because inevitably someone's like, I don't know what happened, but it lost something that I really loved. I'm like, well, tell me the version that you loved. And so I can kind of go back and, practically you're like importing settings from that day, or you bounce some sounds that were really good that day. But because everything tends to shift. But that's kind of how I leave a breadcrumb trail, though.
Yeah, that's a simple one, and I think it's a smart one to remember, and it's hard to do sometimes. Because there are also those times where I'm like, I'm not going to work on this session. I'm just opening it to look at something, and then I'll mess with it, and I'm like, oh crap, did I hit save by accident?
Yeah, you lose something.
Yeah.
The session backup's always good for that too. But you look at that rough and there's like this little time, okay, I bounced that rough at 6:01, so you go back and try to find that session file.
Now, do you have another way? If you have a session with a date on it, so you've opened it every day and it's all this stuff, and you look back and you're like, oh crap, what was the day that we had the cool organ overdub or something like that? Do you have another way that you kind of notate those sessions and the tracks to just keep track of that? And also, how do you keep track of who played what on what song? That's one of the ones that's hard for me to remember as a producer.
Yeah. I don't really write that down. I try to keep notes as I'm working, but I don't really write down who played what. For the most part, I just remember. But it's always, at the end of a project, inevitably, someone's manager will say, hey, we need you to send us over a list of credits.
Mm-hmm.
And that usually means me taking, a few hours and just opening up every session and going through it and being like, oh yeah, I remember it, jogs your memory. But I think I've been able to be pretty accurate with that over the years. But yeah,
one of the lessons
I have a good system for that.
Oh, sorry. One of the lessons I learned the hard way was whenever I'm going to do credits, put it together and then send it to everybody involved first. And make sure I get a lot of eyeballs on it. Because I did a record where I had asked for a lot of favors from people. And one of my good buddies who played bass on it, who really was proud of playing on it, I just overlooked it. I just didn't have his credit on the record, and I didn't catch it ahead of time, and I just felt so terrible about it. So I guess that's one way to learn, right?
No, I did that recently with an artist who'd played a guitar part. They were very proud of it, and in my mind, I thought I had written it down because I specifically wanted to make sure they got the credit for that, and then I guess I didn't. And they're like, "Hey, did you replace this? I was really proud of that." I'm like, no, I didn't replace it. Like, I promise it's on there. I just forgot to write it down.
So Rockstars, again, the tip there would be write down the credits and then just email them to everybody you can think of who had anything to do with the record and just say, how does this look? I'd rather sort through a bunch of, too much input rather than forget to put somebody's credit on there who deserved it,
Yeah.
And now it's like, where does the credit even go? I guess it goes in the official files somewhere, but unless you're printing a CD or vinyl.
Yeah, that's a bummer, I think, because I want to read credits, and they're always pretty limited on all music, or they're not quite accurate. But yeah, Spotify does a good job of going to the song info, and you can see the producers, which Apple Music just lists everything out as composers. But I do wish that both of those platforms would give you more detailed notes on it. Because I'm interested. Like, what's the IMDb for music? I guess it's all music, but.
Okay, cool. Let's see. Let's talk about some more writing stuff. What do you do when you've got writer's block? Are there any tricks that help bump you out of it? If you're in the moment and like you got to do something, do you have a way to push yourself through?
I think, I don't know if this is the answer you're looking for, but I think you just, at times like that where you feel uninspired, you just go to work. You just, just push through it, like write something that you don't think sounds good. And again, it's like, it could be great and you just can't recognize it in the moment.
Yeah.
You ever read The War of Art? You know that book?
Yeah. Stephen Pressfield.
There was I can't remember who the actor was, or he was, using this example in the book about, do you wait till you're inspired to write, or do you, do it the opposite way? And he's like, no, I wait for inspiration to strike, but fortunately for me, it strikes every morning at 9 a.m.
Nice.
And I always thought that was, I was like, this is when I'm working. This is what I do. And, you kind of, like I said earlier, I think I always feel that pressure of when someone's coming in to write of like, oh, I need to be impressive right now. And some days, like, maybe you're impressing yourself, but you're not impressing anyone else. And then some days you're just like, well, I'm not feeling anything, but I'm just going to kind of go with what I have right now, or kind of force it out. And other people don't know that. And then it triggers something for them, and then that triggers something back for you. So there's always that kind of passing around of energy in a room. So maybe a good thing to do when you're stuck is try to inspire the other person to come up with a good idea.
Who are some of your songwriting influences? And, I wrote this question. I don't even know what I meant by this question. I said, do you balance current styles with older musical styles? So I guess that means, do you sort of write from your memory of music of the past, or do you sometimes incorporate what seems to be the new thing? And, there must be a lot of pressure to also do, give us that so-and-so sound.
Yeah. I had just listened to an interview with Rick Rubin, and he had made this point that just stuck with me about not getting bogged down in trying to recreate a sound from a record that you loved. Because he's like, I always just try to make the best sound I can with whatever tools I have at that given moment. Because playing that game of recreating something, you can be inspired by it and try to move in that direction, but you're never going to nail it. And so you're always kind of live under that feeling of that you're failing to get this sound. So yeah, there is a lot of pressure. I think that's a good thing to talk about is how to incorporate your influences into what you're doing. Because, everyone has them. Everyone comes into the studio and says, I want it to sound like this, or I want it to sound like that. And probably what they mean is I want to feel the way I felt when I listened to this, as opposed to just completely copying the sound. But, I don't think I'm unique in this, that, I kind of grew up in a time where you could hear all sorts of genres of music at once. It's even more off the charts now with Spotify, but I think you have all these influences in you and they kind of come out naturally. So I don't try to think too much about, I want this to sound like Neil Young, or I want this to sound like Peter Gabriel. Like as you're creating, you're like, oh, this kind of sounds like maybe something Peter Gabriel would do. And you kind of can use that as an influence, but you don't want to get too bogged down into trying to copy it exactly. But yeah.
Cool. How important is metaphor in songwriting? When do you like to say something directly versus sort of impressionistically?
I always tend to like metaphor. I like impressionistic writing, I think, better than direct writing sometimes. I think it leaves a wider door for the listener to kind of find their way into what you're saying. Because the application could be broader. But to contradict what I just said too, I think another key thing in writing is the more you write specifically about what you're going through, the more people relate to it. Like you don't want to water down what you're writing about to make it, in the effort to make it more appealing to other people.
Right.
But if you're writing specifically about what you're going through, people will connect to it. And more people will connect to it.
So that's kind of another question I had was, do songs come from personal experiences or should they be universal? This is kind of talking about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And in some ways, the more personal you write, the more universal it will be. I think that's really true. So I like people to be honest and to really be raw in what they're writing about. But I also said I really like impressionistic writing too. I think what I mean by that is I like when people paint a picture with words, like they kind of create an environment, almost like a scene of a movie. And maybe you're not sure exactly what they're talking about, but it feels inspired. And every time you listen to it, you kind of plug in a different experience of your own into that scene, And it's like a room that you can walk through several times and notice something different every time.
How do you call BS on cliche? How can you tell when, and what do you do when you're working with somebody and you just feel like what's being said has been said before and it's not really genuine?
Oh man, it's all about context. I kind of maybe touched on this point earlier about like a really great writer where they have mastery over what they're doing and you trust that they're really good, can use a cliche. And if they use it in a really creative way, then it's like, it feels different than maybe someone that you don't have as much respect for as an artist or a writer, and they use a cliche and it's like, they're just being lazy. But if someone you really think has mastery over it, they use the cliche, you wonder why they used it. And maybe there's a deeper meaning to it. And so it's all about the context.
Yeah. I mean, I do feel like cliche is something that we all use in the begining. I mean, like, if I was joking about this the other day, it's like, if I have to hear the lyric Boulevard in a song, or if I have to, or if somebody's writing about the clouds that the swirling cream makes in their coffee, I'm just like, just don't put that in your song.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I think the thing for me is like someone talking about, maybe they're writing about being contemplative, but they're having coffee while they're really having a deep thought. It's like, oh man, I've heard that so many times before.
He said, I just finished my coffee cup just now too.
Yeah. No, I think it's also true with like, sometimes if I'm writing with someone, I'll be like, hey, here's an idea. I don't think this is the idea, but it's sort of a move in the right direction. What do you think about this? And maybe you sing it out. And it's just like, it just doesn't feel right. And then the person you're writing with, they're a really great singer. You're like, well, let me try it out. And they might sing the same thing. And you're like, whoa, that's really convincing. It just has to come from the right voice, and it has so much to do about how a lyric lands. It's just how someone sounds singing it. And everyone sounds different singing different lyrics. That's why I love covers so much, is you kind of hear someone else sing a song and it takes on a whole new meaning.
Yeah. Atom Audio designs monitors with a mission to bring accuracy, transparency, and high definition to your studio, guiding you each step of the way on your journey from starting out in a home studio to installing your ultimate mixing setup in your pro studio. Check out their complete line of speakers and headphones, from the T-Series to the AX Series to their top-of-the-line S-Series, which all use the unique ART accelerated ribbon tweeter design, famous for creating smooth, detailed imaging that lets your speakers disappear into your music. Want to feel awesome to make brilliantly accurate creative decisions in your mixes because you can finally hear your music clearly? Your ears are the greatest instrument you have, and if you can hear the music, then you can mix the music. Learn how to set up your studio monitors and control room for great sound, plus lots of other cool studio tips at atom-audio.com/education.
Mastering is a guilty pleasure. It's been phenomenal to hear a client tell me that the master wasn't just perfect, but it was right. It connected. I love assisting with the mixing process by giving free feedback, just because, if the mix feels some positive impact from my input, frankly, it'll be easier to master. At least 50% of the mastering is preparing the mix. If the mix is really good, most of the mastering is already done. It's much more of a conversation now from end to end. It shouldn't be a black art that's hidden behind closed doors. Shouldn't be a one-shot deal either. Even after the master is delivered, we can still work on it. We can even go back and make mix changes later and update the master for a fraction of the cost. That's the iterative master. I'm Brian Murphy of Sound Porter Mastering. Let's talk about how I can help elevate your mix into the best master possible. Contact me and get free feedback on your mix or a free master demo at soundporter.com.
Want to record killer drums in your home studio? Rockstars of Drums will show you how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with a Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Want to start mastering your own records? Rockstars of Mastering walks you through exactly how I mastered my own record using nothing but plugins in PreSonus Studio One. Want to learn how to create a mix that doesn't suck but rocks instead? At Mix Master Bundle, I show you how to mix using stock and free plugins so that you can have punchy, powerful drums, guitars that rock, bass you can feel, and a mix that is in your face. Plus, it's totally free as my way of saying thanks for listening. Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now and look for the clickable link in the show notes below. How often do you find yourself writing for other voices than your own? I guess probably a lot, right?
100% of the time.
And then what are some things that you've learned? Like, in other words, there must be lines where you sing it, you're like, I can't even hit that note, but you're like, but it'll work for you. I remember being struck by that the first time in the studio. I was writing a harmony for a female artist I was singing with, and I was like, oh, this sounds great. And I'd sing it to her, and then she'd sing it, and she was like, and in her voice, it was like, "Lo," and I realized, I was struck. I was like, wow, we have different ranges for our voices.
Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty far along. Like I said, I moved to town in 97, and, it's 2001 now, or 2020. What year is it? 2021. I always joke around, like, growing up, it's like there was, in my mind, there was like the early 80s was a thing, late 80s is a thing. The 90s are sort of three distinct periods in my mind. And then everything, there's like 2000 on, has been like one big mushy year in my brain.
Right.
It's like all the sounds are kind of glued together.
Yeah, now with Spotify and stuff, and just all the music streaming, does it just always feel like everything is always everything? Probably not.
Oh, yeah. No, but what I was going to say about that is, like, I think I'm just now starting to incorporate that in my conscious thought more when I'm writing with someone. Is that, like, this might be objectively a good or bad melody, but either you sound good singing it or you don't. And that has so much to do with the tonality of their voice and just the range of their voice. Yeah. So when you're with someone, like, I just worked on a record, we just finished it up for Ellie Holcomb, and she is just a fantastic singer. And I love when I put on a record. Wrecking Ball does this for me. Like, Where Will I Be? It starts off and Emmylou Harris is the top of her range. Like, she's already at this high point. And I just wanted to do a song with her where, like, she comes in at her high point of her range and just gripping from the beginning. So sometimes you push a song that way just because you want to hear this person sing in a certain way. And then it kind of unfolds from there.
I always enjoy doing that in the studio where, you discover that just moving the capo up and down the guitar with the singer and find out, like, okay, well, where's this top note going to break? And, where's this low verse note going to get so low we can't even hear you in the mix?
Yeah. And that's what's tricky about that too, is like you get up to the top of someone's range and then like, I can't sing that. That's not really a great range for me. And you're like, is that true or is that just true today? Like, are you going to come back in a couple of days and nail it? Are you just tired right now? Or once you embody the song, I think you can do things with it. That's an interesting phenomenon too. Like how when you write a song, someone can sing it the first time and it just has magic to it. And you're like, I want to see how far we can push this. We'll come back and try a vocal later. They're never able to beat that first day.
Yeah.
And then sometimes the complete opposite's true. Is that first day, you're like, maybe we're just totally in the wrong key, but they just needed to come back and sing it on a different day and internalize the song better. And then they can really hit it with more confidence. So
I've absolutely heard singers come back to the mic and just nail something that they were burnt out trying to figure out the first time around. But, also like you're talking about, like, again, it's like how useful are question marks in the studio? When it comes to plugins and sounds, there's always a question mark at the end of every single idea. It's like, you create something and then you're like, well, but what about this plugin? And what about that compressor? And it's like you'd never get anything done otherwise.
Yeah, like learning when to move forward is a big thing. And just like what we were saying about the vocal thing, like I think I spent a long time, like I said, learning, coming out of a bedroom and, just trying to figure out what the right way to do something was and the wrong way to do something. And just at this point now, I'm like, it always feels like you're feeling your way through a project. It's not like, oh, we did this the correct way and now it's done. It's like you just you try different things and you figure out where it sounds good. And then you just sort of trust yourself to say, this sounds really good to me. And I'm really compelled by this. And if I am, hopefully someone else will be too. And it could have been recorded on an iPhone. It could have been recorded on, the best mic. And like, there's no rules to those things. I think you just try different things and see what the situation gives you in return. And just learning the right time to kind of stick a flag in it and say, this is what we're doing. This is what this sounds like now.
Nice. Stick a flag in it. Have you written that song yet? Stick a flag in it?
No, I haven't.
How do you know what you want to say in a song?
I don't know.
That's it. The stumper question of the podcast.
Well, what I'm thinking is like, there's those days where you write with someone and it feels very impressionistic. I mean, I could, there's plenty of examples of writing with someone where you're like, I feel like I'm just throwing images and ideas at this. And at the end of the day, I'm just like, I don't even know what this song's about. Like it just felt like it wasn't going in a really sure direction. And then the other person's like, this song means a lot to me for XYZ. And there's very concrete things they think that song is about to them. So like, I just think there's a mystery to that, knowing what, like sometimes the song writes you, I guess is what I'm trying to say, is you kind of go into that internal place and say what's on your heart and you bring something out and you're not even sure where it's coming from or what it means in a moment. And then you can listen back to it a couple months later and be like, I know exactly what this song's about. It's another phenomenon.
Another thing that I feel like I discover, which is kind of fun, is you can take an idea or a melody or a lyric that just at first feels like what is that? Come on, like that's not a thing. But then as soon as you double it, it's like instantly a thing.
Yeah. Totally.
It's like it reinforces it. It makes it true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, there's always that thought of, you play a wrong note, then play it again. Then it becomes intentional.
Right. Who was that? Who said that? Somebody said that. You were talking about we were joking about, Boulevard and coffee, singing about coffee. And I think the theme of that was the idea of sort of, common experiences and how they play into the creative stuff. And it reminded me to pivot back to Ingrid Michaelson, Hell No. And the video that's out for that is her like doing all these Instagram filters and singing all the parts. Are you familiar with the video? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, at first when you brought it up, I'm like, I don't know if I've seen that. But then you described, I was like, yeah, I have seen that.
But I just thought that was like a clever use. It's like the flip side to that equation is like sometimes you have to include the most common, like, ubiquitous kind of thing in songwriting. And that's what works so well. And that's what's really, I guess, that's the fine line between clever and,
right.
Quote a little Spinal Tap there.
Yeah.
But, the idea of sometimes it's like, it's the impressionistic, but it's also, or direct, but it's also like taking in things that are just as universal as like an Instagram filter and making that the theme of the message.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What? You can run with that one, Cason. What else you got? What are some other places where the most generic kind of idea becomes the core of something for creating and just seems to be awesome?
Yeah, where my mind goes with that question is just back to the idea of people having their demos that they're making at home. It might be just a very, very common chord progression, but something about the way they're playing it or the sound that they're using just really invokes something special. And you can try to recreate that later, and it just doesn't have the same vibe. A lot of it is just sounds like going back to that Matthew Perryman Jones record. It's Land of the Living. We recorded it in a barn in Texas, and just the way Matthew writes, like maybe there's a song where he just plays an E chord for 8 bars. That's just the most simple thing ever. But if that's captured in the right way, that could be really, really compelling. And if it's recorded in the wrong way, it could be really, really boring. So I think it's trying to frame something really common in a really unique way can really bring out what's interesting about something simple.
Yeah, sort of that question of how many chords is enough. How many chords is too many? Louis, 3 chords, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, but like just, the question being like, what are sort of the generic things that become interesting? I mean, I think that happens all the time. We're just, especially when you start writing a song, you're like, oh, you can start at G and then go to C. Is that interesting? Well, that could really be powerful if it's set up the right way and executed right. And it could be just, in one ear and out the other if it's not.
We'll just rescue it with a B minor.
Yeah.
Awesome. Let's see. What else do I want to pivot on? To bridge or not to bridge?
Bridges.
Yeah, bridges.
Bridges are always I actually talked to someone the other day. I've kind of avoided the Zoom rights so far because I've the past few years I actually have been mainly just doing full-length records for people. So any writing has been kind of in conjunction with the record that I was doing.
Right.
But so I was talking to someone the other day, and I was like, I've kind of avoided the Zoom rights so far, and they're, like just a new way of doing things. I don't know how I'm going to feel doing that. They're like, oh, I love it. Because everyone just wants to get done quicker and they're more direct with their ideas and you don't fish as much. You just kind of commit to things. And I was like, I bet no one writes a bridge. They're like, no one ever writes a bridge on Zoom.
That's great. What a quote. Yeah. No one ever writes a bridge on Zoom.
And then there's something, it could come off lazy, but if you're writing with an artist, where you want to give them a lot of space to put themselves into the song. So it means something to them. So you kind of want to wind them up and get them going. And sometimes, the bridge always gets written last, and that's usually towards the end of the day. So there is some virtue to saying, like, why don't you dig in and write this bridge? Kind of wrap this idea up in your own words. So.
Yeah, I picture Christopher Walken saying that. He's like, I got to have more cowbell. Nobody ever writes a bridge on Zoom,
No one ever writes a bridge on Zoom. You're asking about cliches and, when things get generic. Bridges are tricky to be because they can very, very easily be cliche, and they can very, very easily be generic. It's
the
like
middle eight.
Yeah, the middle eight. You go to the 6 minor, and then we're gonna get a little serious here for a second. So I really love bridges that kind of come out of left field and like just introduce you to a whole new emotion of the song that completely fits, but it's just somewhere you didn't think it was going to go. And a lot of times I'm like, if you can't do that, then I'd almost rather not have one.
So Harry Nilsson, Me and My Arrow, I don't know if you know that one well, but it's,
I do know that one.
You do know it?
Well, I know that song, but I probably just know the first couple minutes of it.
Well, it's just a fun, Me and My Arrow, but then it goes to the bridge and it hits the E minor, which I guess was the 6 minor. I can't remember, but and it means like, and if she's gone, and if we wake up just to, if we break up just to make up, she might be gone. Or if I wake up in the morning, she might be gone. And it's like all of a sudden I'm like, wow, he's like writing about his divorce or something in the middle of his children's song. Yeah. So I can see what you're talking about, like taking it real serious in the bridge all of a sudden.
Yeah. No, most of my, I'll confess, I didn't really know who Harry Nilsson was until that documentary came out. Who in the World is Harry Nilsson? And man, I just watched that so many times. And so I've gone back and studied some of his music, but most of what I know is just what was on the documentary. But that song really stuck out to me. And without maybe the bridge wasn't on that documentary, but they kind of couple it in the documentary with the that cartoon of if everyone's got a point. What's your point?
Yeah,
everyone's got a point.
Yeah.
And Me and My Arrow, it's like getting your point across, or how important it is that you're understood or your point of view is coming across. And maybe that's an interesting tie-in to it's about his divorce. Maybe they both wanted to be heard. It was more important to get your point across than it was to listen to the other person.
Yeah, wow. I didn't think about how the verse was about that too. That's pretty brilliant. Yeah. We're getting deep now, rock stars. It's good stuff. I love this.
And maybe it's not, but that's what it came off as to me,
Yeah, no, that's brilliant, man. We'll have to have you on every week so we can reanalyze everything, all of my experiences and give me a new perspective. Thanks very much.
No problem.
What about co-writing? If you want to talk more about co-writing, if you had advice for the rock stars about, if they're going to do some co-writing, what were some, give them three pointers for their first co-writer to go experience that? Nothing like putting you on the spot, dude.
No, I mean, I think when I'm brought into a room, I'm usually brought in as the track guy, or I'm writing for someone's record. So I feel like I'm almost always in the position of not writing for myself. I'm always in the position of writing, helping someone else write for themselves.
Yeah.
So I think we talked about this a little bit, but that first hour when someone comes in, of just making someone feel really relaxed and kind of mining something great out of them, figure out where they're at, what they want to say, what they haven't said. And the whole creative process can really feel like a therapy session, where you're just kind of giving someone a platform to talk and kind of get out what's inside of them. And then once you do that, it can go in any number of directions. I mean, sometimes you are writing because they need a fast song or they need a slow song, but
how do you capture something in that moment? Like when you hear them say something or they just did something, you're like, whoa, do you always have some sort of recorder rolling so you can rewind a little bit? Do you just capture it in your mind and write it down with pencil and paper? What are some things that work for you?
There's some lyrics. I mean, maybe they're in the middle of a thought and you don't want to stop them. So you just kind of jot down something they said and you can return to it later. But I mean, with the iPhone, with just the voice memos, if people are kind of playing an instrument and you're kind of in something that you think is going to eventually get derailed and you're going to go somewhere else, just pull it out and hit record a couple minutes of it. And then if you get away from that, you're like, hey, what were we saying a minute ago? You can kind of rewind that way.
You know how the iPhone has, they try to make it a quick button so you can take a photograph quickly, which is ironically never quick enough. But yeah. I was always struck by them. Like, why couldn't, the phone companies make the only button on this phone just to instantly record audio? That's all I want out of a phone.
No, that would be great. I wish I used the voice memo recorder more. I was thinking about that today, like just not even just for music, but just making notes for myself or a thought that I had that maybe you want to go back and journal about later. But one of the reasons I don't do it is because I have so many on there already. It's just going to get lost in the pile. And
right.
I never go to the trouble of labeling it. Now it labels by the address, like it used to just be like note 85. And now it's like, it gives you the address that you're at, which is an interesting feature.
Well, at least you can remember where you were for a co-write, but it's probably going to give you some indicator that you're like, I don't understand. I wasn't at the, mission that day or something. But Jack White, I remember he had a quote once that I read where he talked about, I guess he was asked about recording a song ideas and he said, nah, he said, usually the good ones will just keep coming back to me. But, that's for the personal experience too.
It's totally personal. I've heard several artists I really admire say that, like the good ones don't leave you, or if it's really important, you won't forget it. And that's just not true for me.
Right.
Like I forget things all the time.
Yeah, me too. Especially like unusual guitar finger picking and, chord formations and stuff like that.
That's something I was going to say earlier too, but it plays into this totally. Is like I'll sit down and come up with like a little motif on the piano, and it might be really easy for me to play. It feels rudimentary and makes me think, oh, this isn't that impressive or it's not that interesting. It's too easy to play. And it's great to record it and disconnect yourself from the experience of making it. Because you're like, wow, that just really is moving, even though it is simple. And
yeah.
I think being in a band kind of taught me that lesson when I remember this one story of recording it at Malcolm's. This is just a story that's stuck with me. I've probably told it before. But where I was playing a part, trying to come up with a part for this verse in this song. And everything that I was playing to me was very unimpressive because it was too easy to play. And I thought I needed something complicated. And I was about to abandon the idea. And our bass player runs into the other room like, what is that? That's great. What are you doing? I'm like, it's just this little thing that I was about to sweep under the rug. He's like, no, that needs to be the thing. You need to play that here. And over time, it became something that I really loved. But I think what I learned from that is the experience of playing a part and the experience of listening to a part are two totally different things. Like they're not very related at all. And I feel like writing can be that way too. Like no one knows what mood you were in the day you were writing. And that's what you were asking about writer's block earlier too. Like just the idea of when you feel stuck, just keep pushing forward with it. Just keep working. You're still creating something and putting it out there. Maybe it's great. Maybe you're just not having a very good emotional relationship with it right now, but maybe it's true and maybe it's compelling to other people. And again, it comes back to that Jim Scott thing of like, don't fuss over it right now. Just commit to it and then come back to it tomorrow. You'll know instantly if it's good or not.
Yeah, and you're talking about sweeping it under the rug. I guess it depends on how nice the rug is. I mean, if the rug is real nice, then maybe it's better. Do you feel like the time you've spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has gotten you nowhere? Have you been looking for a simple, straightforward, step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take years to learn? What if you could have a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all your mixing struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is just for you. Now you can discover a proven step-by-step mix system from Grammy-winning mixer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix from your home studio that will sound amazing everywhere. When you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then get started at ultimatemixingmasterclass.com. Okay, so talking about guitar and finger picking too, Ben Rector Paris has a gorgeous finger pick guitar on there, and I wondered if you remembered some of the process of capturing that.
Well, full disclosure, I didn't do that track.
All right, there you go. Well, it's not the first time that's happened on this podcast, I'll tell you that.
Well, there you get back into the credits thing again. Yeah. No, I did it. We did 6 songs together, and I think 4 ended up making it on the record, but that wasn't one of them.
Okay. Well, do you have some favorite ways to capture an acoustic that you do really like? What if your answer was like, I hate acoustic guitar?
No, I love acoustic guitar, and I love putting acoustic guitar in pop music. And I have, on that record, there's a song called Fear, and I remember really liking the mandolin sound that we got on that. And it wasn't anything fancy. It was just a Kiwi, like a blue Kiwi. And so I think when I'm recording acoustics, I either like a nice large condenser microphone, like something it sounds big, but it's still in mono. Like that's the direction to take. But I've just gotten so much mileage over the years out of Audio-Technica 4033s, like on a Blumline bar, like kind of like putting that together. Like I've recorded acoustics that way. I've recorded vocals that way in stereo.
Really, in stereo. I didn't know that. I forgot that 33 would do figure 8 though. Does it, or does it do?
No, you do. You two of them on a Blumline, right? So you have like a left and right. So it's 2 microphones.
Okay.
In each one. I mean, that's, talking about like Need to Breathe. One of the ways that I kind of got to know Bear was Trent Dabbs and I had written some for his solo project, the Wildwoods project. And I mean, this fits into everything we're talking about, where we wrote this song called Someday Soon. And he puts down the acoustic part. And I have those Audio-Technica set up just so people can kind of throw something down really quick. And I know it's going to sound good. And it's not a fussy piece of gear. And so he puts down the acoustic part, sounds really great. And then I'm like, cool, why don't you just hop up over onto the vocal mic over there and throw down a scratch vocal? And he's like, why don't I just sing it into these mics here for the acoustic? It might feel like it's coming from the same place sonically,
Right, and you're like, you can't do that. That's against the rules.
Yeah, I was kind of like, well, sure. I mean, it's just a demo, who cares? And he's got these mics didn't have any compression on them, and he's very, very dynamic singer. He get very loud, but also could be very intimate too. And he's kind of sitting on the couch and singing this vocal. I'm like, when you get loud, you got to pull back or it's going to clip, So he sings this vocal, and there's something about having those stereo mics where he turns his head, left and right, and you kind of feel that in the recording, And it just was a really, really great way to record his voice. And we ended up doing maybe like 4. A good friend of mine, Gabe Simon, produced that record, but I ended up working on the vocals on about 7 tracks on that, and them just coming back to my studio, and we did a lot of the vocals that way through the stereo pair of mics for a lead vocal, which I'd never done before.
That's great.
Left and right.
So I have something called the Isotope Spire Studio, which has a built-in stereo mic, and I think it's Omni mics. But same sort of thing, like in writing ideas, the sound of the mic being in sort of an odd location nearby, a little bit too far away, or it's sort of on the table, or it's on your knee. And it's fun to hear that in the headphones and just like create the part so that it fits the sound of the mic instead of worrying about, setting up an exact vocal mic and doing it that way.
Yeah. I used to think, what someone was playing, it needed to be great on its own, and then you'd figure out how to capture it, like what you're saying. But, like what you're hearing as you're creating really affects what you're creating.
Yeah. Actually, it brings to memory some videos my daughter's been showing me. So, we've been watching a lot of Star Wars this year, as you can imagine. Probably everybody has.
And I have 3 boys.
Yeah, exactly. And then there are these really hilarious YouTube videos where they strip the John Williams music from Star Wars, and then they kind of recreate the Foley sounds in the background. And it's just really hilarious. And it's just that reminder of like, it's like what you just said. It reinforces that. It's like, it's about the way it all comes together in the end that makes it work. The idea that you strip one thing from it and it's totally fine on its own. Granted, Yesterday is a great song. Although if I sang it, it might not sound quite as great. It's hard to say. I haven't tried that one.
You're like, yeah, that's cool. That's a cool song. Like one fun story about that is I'd mentioned that Matthew Perryman Jones record earlier, and we were talking earlier about how much do you lean into your references, your inspirations. Well, a lot of our sonic touch points for that record was a lot of reverb. Like we wanted a lot of reverb.
Yeah.
And he hadn't written a lot of the songs for it yet, and he had like a little home kind of garage situation where he would go out and write. And I was like, man, let's set you up with a little PA system out here. So like when you're writing, you could sing into the microphone, and I had a little reverb unit that we set up, with a nice long reverb on it. And so he wrote a lot into that microphone that way. And I can't help but think that affected how long he wanted to hold a note, or how he wanted to pace his lyrics so that you could play off the reverb, like the length of the reverb, and leave space to hear that cool sound, as you're writing a song, kind of all feeds into into it for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was doing my Bonnaroo studio, I think it was like the very first year I did it, or the second, Jim James from My Morning Jacket came in and they performed and they brought in his reverb. He just traveled with like this rack unit and that was always on his vocals. And then, we were done with the music performance and he was getting ready to be interviewed by Colonel Bruce Hampton. And I was like, you want to just leave the reverb on your voice for the interview? And he was like, yeah, sure. So Colonel Bruce would ask him a question in a dry vocal mic, and then you'd hear him talk back and answer it in this super huge reverb.
You think about how you identify the way someone's voice sounds, and the reverb has so much to do with that. Like you can completely change the character of how someone's voice sounds with the reverb that you're using for sure.
What would Elvis have sounded like if there was no slap, I mean, there were songs where he didn't have the slap. Yeah, come on.
Have you seen this movie Mank?
Not yet, right no. But I interviewed the guy who did all the music for that recently, and that looks like it's really cool.
Well, it's amazing. It's David Fincher, who's one of my favorite directors. Just you talking about like how someone just sets an atmosphere where you feel like you're in a different world. Like I'm listening to this, and Gary Oldman's the lead character, and about halfway into it, and I'm like, I feel like I'm dreaming. Like I feel like I'm asleep. Like something's very odd about this. And I was listening on my AirPods, like just watching on the phone. I was like, oh, there's like this reverb on his voice. And it's like, it's the same reverb no matter what room he's in. So he could be outside,
cool.
He could be in his bedroom. And there's like this weird kind of consistency in the atmosphere around his voice that makes it feel very odd and very, very cool.
That's awesome.
Cool.
The guest was Scott Michael Smith, who was on before your episode, and I think he was mixing. We were talking about scoring and mixing the music for it, but that whole production seems like it's very, very cool the way they've done that.
Yeah, it's got to be so intentional, like because it really. I mean, and that goes back to like maybe, maybe I should give people more of a benefit of the doubt. But if there's a filmmaker that's not very experienced and they go into post and they're like, we're going to put the same reverb on all these voices to the whole movie, no matter what room they're in. It could feel like lazy or not come off right or something, but you get a really experienced filmmaker like that. And you got to know that's so intentional.
Yeah.
And so you receive it a little bit differently. Like they're probably trying to make you feel like you're in a dream or something.
So what you're saying is that when you record a record and you're using nothing but iPhone, the voice memos app, it's going to sound awesome.
It's a strong creative choice, not an accident.
Strong creative choice. Awesome, dude. Well, Kayson, thanks so much for joining us on Recording Studio Rockstars. I've got a closing question that I'll jump to here for us to wrap up. This one is hypothetical, and you won't be the first person to answer this question, but you'll be the first person to answer it in your own way. We're going to take the Wayback Studio machine and go back in time. That was the backwards sound. And you're going to go back and find young Kayson, who's, maybe you're probably, if you're 3 and you're singing on stage for the first time, that's a little too young to answer this question, but maybe a little older than that. But you go back and give yourself one bit of advice and say, look, dude, here's the single most important thing you need to know as you move to Nashville and start your own studio to become a rock star of the studio yourself one day. What advice would you like to go back and give yourself if you could?
I mean, what comes to mind would be just trust your instincts, trust what you love. I think that's what makes you unique. I dropped out of Belmont after the first year, and I think I kind of got it in my head that I didn't know what I was doing and that other people knew more than me. And I think that taking that posture you can learn a lot that way, and it's good to have that perspective. But I think I could have used a bigger dose of just do it your way. Trust what sounds good to you, and don't worry about what other people are doing. Again, maybe the short version of that is comparison is the thief of joy or whatever. Like, just don't compare what you're doing to other people too much. Just stay true to what moves you.
Nice. Comparison is the thief of joy.
Yeah.
So joy has a whole a crew, and comparison is the thief in the crew. No.
Yeah. It's like a pirate situation.
Yeah, right. Like a pirate situation. This podcast is like a pirate situation. Dude, thanks so much for hanging with us, man. This is a blast. Thank you for staying. And how's the closet? Is it getting a little stuffy at this point?
Yeah, it feels a little bit like you're in a cell.
Well, as we were joking, you can finally come out of the closet here on the podcast at the end.
Yes, on your podcast.
On my podcast. Let the rock stars know where they can go find out more about you and your music. What if they need to, co-write their next hit on Zoom and not include a bridge? Where should they go?
Well, you can get in touch with me at my website, CasonCooley.com. And then the Instagram handle is just at Kayson Cooley. So
awesome, dude. Well, thanks again, man. I look forward to making some music in the studio. I mean, we live in the same town. If we get out of snowpocalypse and other reasons for never leaving your home again, maybe we'll end up in the studio.
I would love to come over and cut something at your place. It's amazing over there. So
thanks, dude. I appreciate it, man. Yeah. Great to meet you. Thanks for hanging with us, and we'll see you around the studio.
Problem. All right. Talk soon. Thanks.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. And if you want more free content from Recording Studio Rockstars, all you have to do is go to rsrockstars.com/email. Again, that's rsrockstars.com/email to enter your name and email, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, podcast updates, and even free gear giveaways for your studio. Just look for the link in the show notes below. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our amazing sponsors who help make this episode possible. Sound Porter Mastering, OWC, Atom Audio, API Audio, Spectra 1964, Isotope, and JZ Microphones. Remember to get your free mastering demo at soundporter.com and use the coupon code ROCK10 at Isotope for 10% off any plugin purchase, or start your 7-day free subscription trial to get access to lots of their plugins. And use the coupon code ROCKSTARS at jzmic.com for 20% off this very pop filter you're hearing right now for a limited time. You will find links to all these wonderful sponsors in our show notes. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars: Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, Hugh McDonald, and John Richardson for additional podcast and video production. You guys rock. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.